So I think we'll get started because it is now 10 o'clock. I can see there are still people joining, but that's absolutely fine. So it's really great that you're already engaging at this moment in time, and we can see your comments on this slide through the Slido. So it seems like there's some very, well, obviously quite a few things that people would like to get from the day today. Quite a few common areas like job application support, information about being a newly qualified therapist, looking at how to apply for jobs, considering ideas and being provided with support around job applications, learning more about the NQP life, which I suppose does link to the competency completion and what's to be expected from being a newly qualified practitioner and what support you might get. Also things like managing your workload and expectations that a manager might have, and having a better understanding of the role of speech and language therapist. So that's coming up as a common theme. And we also have somebody talking about wanting to know more about EDI, or there might be a few people who've raised that too, and we are going to be covering that during the session today. So that's brilliant. That's really, really helpful to see those comments. So I'm not going to go through the aims and objectives in detail because you can read them on the slide. But I do want to say thank you to the following students, and I'd like them to give us all a wave, please, because they've been on the planning group and have helped us to shape the day. So Neve Foy from Newcastle University, could you give us a wave? Thank you. Valentina Brignoli, if you're there as well, could you give us a wave? Can't see everybody, so I might not see you waving. So brilliant, thank you. James Potter from BCU. And finally, Wen Xiao from Carnell, from the City University of London, if you could give us a wave too. Brilliant, thank you so much. So we're really thrilled about the level of attendance that we're expecting at the event today. So we've had, I think it's 300 students who've registered. I can still see people entering into the event. So we have got representation from 18 universities from across the UK. So I'm really hoping that today's presentations are helpful to all of you. And please do try and stick around towards when we finish the event for the networking session, if you can, because that would be lovely. Okay, so I'm now going to move on to the first part of the event, which is the panel with newly qualified practitioners who are going to share with us their experiences. So I'm going to introduce them first. So there's Alice Chater, who's a speech and language therapist in acute stroke at Darent Valley Hospital at Dartford and Gravesham NHS Trust. Keris Thomas, who's a speech and language therapist at Betsy Cadwaladr, I'm going to pronounce that wrongly, I think UHB West, which is obviously in Wales. Faye Taylor, who's a speech and language therapist in Nottinghamshire Healthcare NHS. And Guri Vinu, who's a speech and language therapist at Sherwood Forest Hospital. So I'm going to pass it over to all of you to provide your insight and share your understanding of how it feels to be an NQP with colleagues. Over to you.
Thanks, Kamini. So hello everyone, my name's Alice Chato. I'm an NQP at Darent Valley Hospital, so that's in Kent. A little bit of background about me. I completed my MSc at City and I graduated in summer. But before that, I'd studied German and linguistics, and I'd worked for 7 years for a translation company and also taught English for 2 years in Spain before deciding I wanted to go into SLT. So having spent time teaching, I thought I was going to go into working in schools with children, but I surprised myself and really enjoyed my hospital placement and all the medical side of the course. And at hospitals, I especially enjoyed the whole SLT team being together on site and spending lots of time together. But with my background, I am too much of a linguist to just want to do dysphagia, and I know some acute jobs are predominantly that. So acute stroke seemed the perfect role for me. So I started here in September, so now been here 3 months. I work exclusively with inpatients on the stroke ward, with swallowing and/or communication difficulties after stroke. Next, please. So the typical working week is not, I don't really have a typical working week. Every day is different, but there are some things that happen daily or weekly. So I've put these into a little timetable. Most of the team here work Monday to Friday, 8 till 4, more or less. And so at around 8 o'clock, we discuss the caseload for the day and prioritise and decide who's going to see which patients and what they're going to do with them in the session. At 9 o'clock each day, a member of my team goes to the stroke ward and attends board round, which is with all the other therapies and the medical team, just to get an update of the plan for the day for each patient and to get an update on medical status. Then we spend time on the ward seeing patients. At 12 o'clock, the whole SLT team here, including other areas apart from stroke, we all have lunch together at 12, which is really lovely to take that time out, spend some time together, just chat about how our day is going. And then at 1 o'clock, our patients have their lunch. So that's a really good opportunity for us to be on the wards to do mealtime observations and to assist those patients who need support with their lunch. Then some weekly sessions that happen. On Tuesday and Friday mornings, we have goal setting meetings with the other therapies, so with occupational therapy and with physiotherapy. And we meet as a SLT stroke team on Monday afternoons to just discuss what we're doing with them. But the idea is that we have overarching goals. So for example, a patient might say, I want to eat a prawn sandwich, or I want to go back to work. And then we decide in these MDT goal setting meetings, who's going to work on which bits so that the patient can achieve that. And then on Wednesdays, we have our stroke multidisciplinary team meeting in the afternoons, and a member of the SLT team attends that. And that's not just with therapies, that's with the medical team as well. And that's a chance to discuss patients more in depth and their longer term plans. And on top of all of this and seeing patients, we have supervision meetings, monthly team meetings, CPD meetings, which happen every 6 weeks or so for the team. So yeah, there's lots going on. Next slide, please. I couldn't think of just one interview top tip, so I'm giving you some interview top tips. Number one is decide when is best time for you to start looking for jobs. I think as soon as some people start going for interviews, it can feel a bit panicked and you start freaking out, but please don't worry. You need to decide when it's best for you personally to start looking for jobs. But I would say that if you're looking to go into a really specific area, or if you're really limited on location, it's probably best to start looking out for jobs sooner rather than later. Definitely find past or example questions and prepare some answers. So you might find those on your university careers page. You might go through some with your lecturers. You can hear from other students who've been on interviews. And Twitter is also a really good place to ask or look out for people sharing questions, and then discuss those questions with your course mates, with SLTs with your practice educators on placement as well. But I certainly hadn't had a stroke placement when I came to interview, so I used a phrase like this a lot in my interview, saying that I hadn't had practical experience in that, but from my theory, I think I would. And last but not least, remember that you're interviewing them as well. You need to be sure that you're going to get the support you need, that you think you get on well with the team. So it's also for you to gauge if you want to work there. Next slide, please. So in terms of your supervision and working towards your NQP goals, start off with, don't be scared to ask or say you don't know, because it's much better to say that at the outset and allow your team to give you that support and that knowledge or training than to just muddle along and just get stressed out and come unstuck in the end. Be proactive about scheduling meetings with supervisors. I'm really lucky that my supervisors are here as well. I see them every day, but depending on your setting, that might not be the case. So my advice is to try and schedule the next meeting at the end of each supervision meeting you have, so that you know when you're next going to see them. Certainly for me, especially because I'm doing the NQP and dysphagia competencies, it all seemed very overwhelming, like a lot of stuff that I had to cover. But you've got to remember that at the beginning, everything you do can be used as evidence. And you can use your supervision meetings when you're discussing what actions you're going to take or what you're going to work on. You can make a note of what competencies those can be used as evidence for, so that you're chipping away. And then block out regular time to write up your evidence and to complete your non-clinical work. So if your team shares a calendar, then block it out on the calendar so that people know that you are working on stuff and that you might be busy. And then also get stuck in from day one. I found myself being volunteering myself for the to take care of the team's Twitter page within the first 2 weeks of my joining. But actually that's a really good way for me to find out what the team's doing outside of the stroke SLT team. Next slide, please. Some final key things from me. Don't worry about not having the specialist relevant placement work. I lost a lot of sleep on that. Other people lost a lot of sleep on that. You probably still will. Me saying it won't make a difference until you've actually lived it. But interviewing SLTs understand that you don't necessarily have a choice about what placements you do, and you might not have had that relevant experience for what you're really interested in. The course, especially the MSc, is super intensive. So if you can, please do take a break before you start work, even if it's just a few weeks, just to decompress, take a breather and get started again. And then keep in touch with your year group. In our big WhatsApp group from my year, we have the odd message every few days asking for advice or tips, or saying, oh, I've had this experience, has anyone had something similar? So that's a really useful point of contact in the future. Next slide, please. And then just one thing I hadn't prepared for. I've worked before, I've had managerial positions before, I've worked long hours. So I didn't expect that when I started in my SLT role, I would be so tired, but you will be. It's a lot of information. You're learning so much every day. So don't jam pack your weekends. Let yourself do nothing. Be kind to yourself, especially in those first couple of weeks. So that's all from me, I think. And so next slide, please. And I think I'm passing on to Keris.
Hi, my name's Keris Thomas, and I recently graduated from Cardiff Met in July on one of the hottest days of the year. So my first language is Welsh, and I work in both the Welsh and English languages. I'm originally from Carmarthen in South Wales. However, I recently moved up to live in North West Wales, which I absolutely love, and everyone is so kind up here. So I applied for 4 different jobs within streamlining, and 3 of them were for the health board I'm now working for. I knew I wanted to move up to live here in North Wales after having brilliant placement experiences. It's so important to have a good feel of the place and the team whilst you're working on placement, as so many of the staff I worked with whilst I was on placement are now my lovely colleagues, and I'm so happy to say that. So I applied for my job through streamlining, and it was advertised as a split post. I was very excited to see this job opportunity, as it gives me so many different opportunities to work within different teams and with different patients. I work for Betsy Cadwallader University Health Board. For 2 days of the week, I work with school-aged children within mainstream schools, mostly with speech sound difficulties. And the 2 other days of the week, I work with adults who have communication difficulties. I do home visits at times with the adults, and I also share 2 outpatient clinics for communication difficulties in 2 different locations. And something I love in regards to working in the community is the fact I get to travel to so many beautiful places in my area and meet so many different people and get to explore the area whilst out and about. And then Wednesdays are my NQP days where I complete my newly qualified framework. I started my job at the beginning of October, so I'm still very new and settling in. But I've had the opportunity to shadow some of my colleagues before seeing my patients on my own, which was an amazing feeling after being a student for such a long time. I've been doing some speech sound therapy with some of the paediatric patients within schools, and for adults, I've been completing some initial assessments and gathering information. It's so important to build a good rapport with your patients to make them feel safe. Next slide, please. So Betsy Cadwallader are actually recruiting some speech and language therapists. If you see a band 5 job you're interested in, you're more than welcome to apply. North Wales is an absolutely beautiful place to work and live, and I've met so many lovely people. And there are some lovely cafes and places for food as well. So some of my top tips for preparing for an interview would be to ensure you understand the core values of that health board. And it's also important for you to not lie on your application form, as when it comes to interview, you might get caught in a lie, which will not look good for you. Also, make sure that you understand your own application and remember what you've written. And you should also remember that your interviewers have most likely read your application. So in your interview, try and give them some new information or something you weren't able to fit into your application. And also make sure that you have at least 3 questions to ask your interviewers. This is because they may have already answered some of your questions during your interview. A question I asked in my interview was, what would my supervision look like if I got the job? And in your application, make sure you link any experience you've had and make it relevant to your job application. Next slide, please. Now, this is my typical timetable. As you can see, Mondays and Tuesdays are my adult days. Wednesdays, I'll either work from home or I'll work in an office and just complete a lot of my NQP framework, collecting my evidence. Then Thursdays and Fridays, I will be working in schools. So I'll travel to the office, check my emails, and then I travel to the schools. And then either on Mondays or Tuesdays, I've either got a team meeting maybe, or I'll just be traveling to a home visit or preparing to see a patient. And then around 10, 11:30, I will see the patient or print off resources and prepare to see them. And then on Thursdays and Fridays, I'd be doing speech sound therapy with children. Then between 11:30 and 12:30, I'd be travelling back to the office from the school or the home visit, or I'll just write up my notes in the office then. Next slide, please. Then between 12:30 and 1, I'll have my lunch. And then between 1 and 2, I'd see my second patient, or I'd travel to my second school of the day. And during your lunchtime, it's important that you do take your half an hour off and that you do relax and don't do work by your computer, and go and just speak with your colleagues and just have a nice little chat with them and do relax during your lunchtime. And then between 2 and 3, after seeing my patients, I'll either travel back from the school to the office, or I'll just be writing up my notes. And I also have a weekly meeting at the moment with my NQP supervisor. I'll speak about that a little bit more later. And then between 3 and 4:30, I will look at my emails and answer anything that needs to be done, and then do any tasks and prepare for the following day. So I like to look at who my patients are the next day, write down on a little notepad who I'll be seeing and what I think would be good to do in that session, either take a case history or which assessment would be suitable for this patient, and the same for my paediatrics. Sometimes with my paediatric patients, I'll be just doing a block of therapy, so there's not too much preparing for the next day apart from printing off resources for the school. And then I will finish work and travel back home. Next slide, please. So my experience of supervision and completing my NQP goals. So my supervisor for my NQP framework has been absolutely excellent. So she's a colleague from the paediatric team. However, I'm able to contact a colleague from the adult team, which is my clinical supervisor, if I've got any clinical questions from the adult side of things, in case I'd need to, when I write my NQP evidence and I need to check that everything's okay, I'll ask my adult supervisor. And it's been really great having weekly meetings with my supervisor. She helps me to suggest anything that would go into each section of the NQP requirements of on the table of the framework. So sometimes it can be quite challenging to think of an example, which is why it's so important to have a supervisor and to have a day. I have a day anyways for all of this, as it can be quite a lot of work to do here and there. So it's nice to have a day dedicated to do your NQP competencies, and just to finish off any other non-clinical work or anything else that I haven't been able to complete on my adults days or on my peds days. So it's nice to have a day for that. Next slide, please. So some of my final key points would be, just try your best to stay calm. I know it's so much easier said than done, but everything will be okay and it will work out in the end somehow. But if you've got any concerns or questions, it's so important for you to ask them, because you'll learn so much and you will be so glad that you did ask, because that's how I learn. If you've got a question, just ask it and then you'll remember, and it'll be so good for your colleagues as well if they've got the same question. Next slide, please. So this is my final slide. So my top tip for something I'd not prepared for. So if you've been successful with your job application, just make sure you get your admin tasks done as soon as possible. So this includes sending off your occupational health documents, applying for your HCPC registration, your RCSLT membership, and anything else TRAC requires you to complete. So my occupational health actually did take a little bit of time, as I was a bit slow submitting it myself. And then there were some issues on the occupational health side of things, which led to extra waiting time to starting my job. So my top tip would be to just complete your TRAC requirements as soon as you can, and then you'd be able to liaise with your manager, your starting date, and then go from there. So thank you so much for listening. I hope it was you found it helpful. And I'll be now passing you on to Faye. Thank you, Diolch.
Hiya, my name's Faye. I live in Nottingham. I'm currently on holiday in the middle of Sherwood Forest, hence the background. And I studied at De Montfort. I know there's not many people here from there today because it's placements. I came into SLT as a mature student. Before that, I was a primary teacher. Got the bug for it after having my own children and basically trying to work out why my daughter wasn't getting going speaking. I've been in post since September, but on the Nottinghamshire have a rotation for Band 5 adult SLTs, which is quite new. Guri, who's following me in the presentations, is also on the same rotation. As well as dealing with being a mature student and having my own children through the lockdowns and schools being closed, I was also diagnosed with autism during my final placement, which is not the way to recommend adding something else in. So this is a bit of the background about the rotation that's very, very new that Nottinghamshire are trying to do. There's also a South Nottinghamshire rotation as well, which is currently between acute inpatient and community acquired, but intellectual disabilities is going to join that rotation eventually. So my role covers, technically my role covers the Ashfield, Mansfield and Newark patches. However, at the moment, I'm also covering Bassetlaw. So basically I'm covering the entire north of Nottinghamshire while they're recruiting. At the moment, I only cover communication cases until my dysphagia competencies are all signed off. But we're being supported across the whole rotation to do that in January, where they're going to do some specific training. We get referrals that come in via a single point of access, which are then triaged and drag rated, and we pick them up onto our caseload when we've got the capacity to do so. So next slide, please. My working week is really tricky because we don't really ever have a typical one. The original plan was that I'd have so many days where I was this area and so many days where I was another area. It's not really worked out like that because my caseload just hasn't worked out like that. And our service users have the most amazing social lives, and I'm working around them. So in an ideal world, I'd have days for a specific patch. I try to group visits as much as I can because Nottinghamshire is huge. But obviously service users take priority. Lots of the work that I do is things like communication assessments, producing communication guidelines, passports, and easy read documentation, social stories and things, along with our fabulous SLT assistants. There's lots of work with the mild intellectual disability client group, where you're uncovering a lifetime of communication masking where they've not understood things and wires have got crossed, and there's a lot of unpicking different strands of someone's life, which really appeals to me. I find that really, really fascinating. Lots and lots of MDT working and providing input back into various professions. Obviously, we work closely with OT, ID nursing, social care, psychology, psychiatry, and there's a fair amount of safeguarding considerations because particularly at the end of the milder end of the intellectual disability spectrum, people can have managed to just about muddle through, but with quite chaotic lives and very open to exploitation in various forms. Next slide. So I started in September and I started straight into trust induction and then into the team induction. I'll be honest, trust induction is an awful lot of death by e-learning, but we all go through it. For the team induction, I shadowed various colleagues from around all the different bases and met lots of different people from different care providers and social work colleagues and things. And as soon as I had access to the system, I was encouraged to pick up the more straightforward caseload at the speed I was comfortable with. However, one of my straightforward cases turned out to be anything but, and ended up with a really complicated safeguarding MDT situation, which I was basically thrown into as the person who'd raised the referral as a very new band 5, but my team did support me, but they supported me from in the background, making me take the lead on it because they knew I could do it. There's lots and lots of work on assessment and support around language with emotions, appropriate and inappropriate sexual behaviour, etc. I do spend a rather large amount of my time discussing ways that we can teach people about appropriate things like weeing in the right place and things, which isn't quite what I'd expected when I went into SLT, but I love it. Next slide, please. Best and worst things I've found, the people, both in terms of my colleagues and people within the trust, but also the staff at various care settings we go to, the parents and the families of service users and the service users themselves. The feedback from, there's a couple of quotes there, One was a lady that I'd worked with doing intensive interaction approach, and we just managed to build up that communicative dialogue. But the staff member at the care home was like, I've never seen her communicate in that way before. And the other quote was an absolutely fantastic guy who had a real history of not engaging very well with health services and discharging himself the second he could get up and walk out. But he was like, you hear that? The lady's going to get to discharge me. I'm not doing it myself. I did joke that I was going to make him a certificate to say he'd been a very good boy. And he thought that was absolutely hilarious. Nottinghamshire is an absolutely beautiful county. I've got the most beautiful drives into see people. And it's just, it changes every time I go through here. This is probably the first time in my life that I am openly accepted as being autistic and not just spending my time apologising for who I am. The worst things, the setup process, when you've had placements and you've been trying to get IT access and laptops and things, it is an absolute nightmare. And I think I spent like weeks at a time sat in the IT guys' waiting room trying to get devices and access to different bases and different systems. Community working can be quite isolated because you're not physically crossing over with people in the office in the way that you would if you were working in a hospital setting or similar. We do a lot of work on Teams, and people will just jump in and chip in and help if they can. But it's a lot of driving, and you do have to have the confidence to be out there on your own. Linked with that, the M1 is the bane of my life. I hate motorway driving, but I get over it. Tractors are a nightmare on the rural roads, and working toilet stops when you're doing community caseload can be an ongoing source of fun. And just the frustration in seeing people fall between the gaps in services, transitions between paediatrics and adults, or people who need a lot more support than we can really give them, but they don't quite qualify for the next tier of support up. You've got to sort of accept that you can't fix the system single-handedly at times. Next slide. My experience of supervision, I came from education. Compared to that, the supervision system is amazing. It's very, very supportive, and it's very, very positive. It's a lot of bouncing ideas around about things. Have you tried this? We've got this resource. So-and-so in this team might be useful. Tips to stay on top of logging it, or you tend to get the automated emails reminding you that you haven't, and then you need to sit and troll back through your diary. Mine is currently set up on these levels. It's gone a bit different from what it was originally intended, because one of my band 6 supervisors has moved on to a different post, so that's open for recruitment. So formally I have band 6 supervisor once a month, but informally one of our band 7 seems to have adopted me a bit, and she checks in on me on the days that she's on the team. How am I going? My managerial supervisor is meant to be once a month, but again, we do cross paths quite a lot anyway. And then we have a peer supervision set up within the rotation. The band 5s get together every couple of months. Plus there's another band 5 within the team who we also sit and work peer supervision that way. And also the other thing I'd say is, while you're new, take all the chances you can get to go and investigate what other teams are doing. We do a lot of, our trust do a lot of allied health professions bite-sized sessions where you can get a taster for what different areas are doing, both within SLT and OT and physio, and that's really interesting. Or pick up contacts or teams that you might want to explore what they're doing. So our autism team is an area I'm interested in, so I'm going to go and spend some time with them. Next slide, please. This isn't really an interview tip, but it's a tip for staying sane on your final year. There's going to be people on your course who look like they are really, really organised, who are sat there now banging out job applications and will have something lined up for the day that the results come out. I remember sitting here at this point in the year and thinking, oh yeah, I've got to do that job application thing. But we all end up getting through it together. It's just, I was absolutely panic stricken. I didn't see posts coming out that I wanted. There was one really rotten final week of uni where they were doing interview prep, and everybody who'd already got their jobs lined up walked off out the room, and we all sat there feeling really, really rubbish. But, you know, it all does pan out. It all falls into place. I didn't really heavily job hunt until I was almost done with my final placement. And I had the interview for this job on my birthday while I was on holiday here, ironically. And it all does, just trust in the world, it does work out, and there is something out there for you. Next slide. And this one is said quite often as throwaway, but it's really, really appropriate. You need to find something that's going to suit you. I've got a history of life going into interviews, trying to read and be who they wanted. It doesn't work. It's not sustainable. And when it did get me the job, it wasn't a good fit. This time around, I went into things having my diagnosis of autism and job hunting, being open about that, and that it's an asset if I use it right and if I find the right place for me. And it has been so positive, and I don't have to put an act on. I don't have to pretend to be something I am, and I do genuinely love what I'm doing. And can I pass you over to Guri, who's also on the rotation?
Thank you, Faye. That was really helpful for me as well, because I'm going to be where you are in probably next year. So that's really helpful. Thank you. My name is Gauri. I'm a Band 5 speech and language therapist at Sherwood Forest Hospitals, and I'm on the same rotation as Faye. I'll talk a bit about my rotation in the next few slides, but this is what I'm going to cover today. I'll talk a bit about my role and what my rotation entails, and how a typical day and a typical week should look like, but more often than not, it isn't always like that. How I prepared for interviews and what to expect. A bit about supervision and competencies and top tips for final year students. Next slide, please. Thank you. So a bit about myself. This is my timeline. I flew in so I did my undergraduate degree in audiology and speech language pathology in India. And I flew in from India, started my master's 2 years ago. This was during the pandemic, so it wasn't the easiest, but year 2 was better than year 1. But before my undergraduate degree, I lived in Dubai all my life. So I did my schooling up until high school in Dubai. Did my undergrad in India, and then flew in from India to the UK for my master's. Finished my master's in September this year. And then I started my new job as a Band 4 speech and language therapy assistant in 1 week later, because I was awaiting my HCPC registration. So I started as a speech and language therapy assistant, and last month I got my HCPC registration. So this is just to let you know that your HCPC registration will take some time, so factor that in. Most of my course mates have taken some time off of uni after they finish their degree, just so they can have a bit of a breather. I actually enjoyed working as a speech and language therapy assistant as well, because I was doing essentially what a Band 5 was doing. I was just waiting for my HCPC registration. But yeah, please do take breaks if you need to. Sometimes I think I probably should have taken more than a week. Next slide, please. So I know it might be really daunting to start a new job, join a new team. But what I was amazed by the most was the amount of support I received from my team. And hopefully this paints a nice picture of the amount of support I get. This is what we call the celebration board in our department. And we put, my team celebrates every little victory, and they put things on the board. So when I got my HCPC registration and got my grades, the board was filled with my name, and later I erased it. But this is just a way of them showing their appreciation for my achievements and for everyone's achievements on the team. Even when I got selected to talk for this event, on the bottom left corner, it says Gauri has been selected to talk at the RCSLT Student Study Day. So it's just amazing to see how much support you can get from your team. And I'm very hopeful that every one of you starting off as an NQP especially will get the same amount of support, if not more. And we have these things called food fuddles where everyone brings things from home. They either make it or they buy it from shops, and we share food and we just celebrate different things like people's birthdays, or when I started we had a food fuddle. So yeah, it's apart from just doing a lot of clinical work, we do have some time off where we enjoy each other's company and share different things about our personal lives as well. If you don't want to, that's fine, but it's just a nice way to sort of engage with your team and know more about people in your team. We also had, we were following the British Bake Off challenges each week. So for bread week, I made a loaf of banana bread. Obviously the photo on the right is not my banana loaf, mine isn't half as pretty, but I didn't take a photo of my banana bread. So I've just put that there as well. So we do a lot of fun stuff. Yeah, next slide, please. So I'm on the ICS. Yes, it is really wonderful. I'm so grateful for my team. I'm on the Band 5 rotation. So ICS stands for Integrated Care Systems, the same rotation as Faye. You can spot Faye with the black cardigan. I'm on the left side of the photo. And essentially what this rotation is, 4 Band 5 SLTs rotate between 4 different placements. I'm currently at Adult Acquired Kingsmill Hospital, and I've regrettably forgotten one L in the mill, but let's ignore that. I'm there for 9 months and I rotate to IDD services, which is Intellectual Developmental Disability Services. And then I move on to Adult Acquired, that's Community Acquired. And then finally Rampton High Secure, which is SLT Forensics. So this job post was very appealing to me because it's got the 4 most interesting fields of adult speech and language therapy. And essentially what it does, it just provides the speech and language therapist with different diverse clinical skills that you can then pick up on and potentially specialize in further, or you could keep rotating within the 4 placements. Next, please. Thank you. This is what my supervision team framework looks like. It's not a typical one. I know most teams have got a Band 7 supervisor, but this is what my team lead, Emma Dawkins, have come up with. And I think it personally, it really does work for me because it means that I've got 2 Band 6 line managers, one from stroke and one from general medicine, who are then overlooked by Band 7 speech and language therapists, who's then again overlooked by a Band 8A service lead. So it means I can seek support from everyone and also get different perspectives on, something that I'm thinking about in terms of like, if I have an issue or if I want to learn more about something, it's nice to have different inputs and also know that I can seek support from different speech and language therapists with varying experiences. Yeah, thank you. It is a great rotation. Next, please. Again, this is what my typical week looks like, but like every other NQP I've just mentioned, it's not always the same. This is just how it should look like. On a Monday, I alternate between the stroke ward and the general medicine ward. So if one week I do the stroke ward, the next week I do general medicine. On the Tuesdays and Wednesdays, I'm with stroke, and on the Thursdays and Fridays, I'm with general medicine. General medicine wards are wards that don't include stroke wards. So they're anything like short stay units, we've got respiratory support, we've got the dementia ward, so anything that isn't the stroke ward, because the stroke ward in itself is a different, it's got an MDT and it's a different setup altogether. Next, please. And this is what a typical day should look like, but isn't the case always. 8 to 9, we do caseload checks. We prioritize patients based on their presenting complaints or their referral reasons. And then we hand it over to other speech and language therapists who might be seeing them. And if it's me, I'll think about which patient I should see first. If I'm on the stroke ward, we've got board rounds. So I attend board rounds from 9 to 9:40, around 9:45 sometimes, where we discuss with other consultants, doctors, PTs, OTs about patients on the ward. So we talk about discharge planning, package of care, where they are from a medical point of view. And if I'm with GenMed, we discuss patients on the caseload, and come up with a plan to see them based on their priority levels. We see patients in the morning, have lunch from 12:30 to 1, and see patients again from 1 to 3. And ideally, I set aside 1 hour, not every day, but mostly once in a week, to do some supervision meetings, some admin work, filling in my CPD stuff, and seeing patients if time permits and if I've got the capacity to do so. Next, please. On a Wednesday, this is not how this, I'm not usually with the video fluoroscopy clinic on the Wednesday, but I do have the opportunity to observe them, and it's really amazing because essentially it's checking, it's an X-ray image of people swallowing. So we had a patient who was aspirating, who was basically, the food were going down the wrong way on everything that person was having. Did a video fluoroscopy for that patient and realized what was going wrong. So there was a lot of aspiration, there was a lot of pooling of residue. We tried a maneuver called the chin tuck maneuver, and it helped that patient. But long-term wise, we thought that wouldn't be appropriate. So that patient's on McNeil dysphagia therapy, and that's some promising results. It's just nice to see how you can marry up bedside evaluation with objective evaluation. So we've got that on a Wednesday. Next, please. This is about my interview process. So like Alice has already mentioned, I practiced some interview answers as well, because I tend to stutter sometimes and I get really anxious and I just go off on a tangent. So I've got a document with some interview questions and answers I'm very happy to share. And then before my interview, I usually research about the organization's core values and trust values and try to link my answers with the core values. So in your answers, if you try to demonstrate motivation to join that team, they appreciate that. And if you try to tick boxes of person specifications, that's what they're looking for. Another thing that I didn't do, but one of my colleagues told me, and I think it's really interesting to include this, is checking the organization's or the team's Twitter account to see what's happening. So if you know they're involved in a project or they've done something in the past that you're very interested in, mention that in your interview, and demonstrate motivation to actually engage in something like that, or just say, I noticed you had this project, I'd like to be a part of that one, or I'd like to do this or take this initiative. So it's just so that they know you are willing to be a part of the team and take initiatives that they appreciate as well. Next, please. Basing your answers around why that organization and that team in particular. Often generic responses don't, I think they do work, but sometimes when you talk about why that organization, why that team in particular, they appreciate it even more. Just be honest about your answers. There's a few, next slide, please. I think on the next slide, these were my person specifications for the job that I'm in currently. And one of the requirements were post-basic dysphagia training or completed competencies. From my placements in uni, I couldn't achieve this because I wasn't given, I didn't have any swallowing opportunities. So I was really honest about it, but I also backed up my answers by saying I have experience working as a support worker with individuals with mental health problems, because that's one of the requirements on the person specs. So just look at the person specs before the interview and try to mention that, incorporate that into your answers. Next, please. So I've used this, I use the STAR approach for all my interviews. I know most of you already know about it, so I'll just whiz through the slide. If you can skip to the next one, please. Thank you. These are some of my interview questions that I thought were important. I'm not going to go through all of them, but the second question was one that I had in my interview. So again, just think about the ICF framework and link different aspects of the ICF with your answers. I think that is appreciated a lot during your interview answers. Next, please. Supervision and NQP goals. So when I was a final year student, I didn't know what supervision meant. Essentially, it's a one-on-one meeting with your line manager, in my case, line managers. You talk about how much progress you made, talk about what challenges you're facing, how you'd like to approach the next competency that you'd like to sign off. Be open with your managers. At one point when I thought it was a bit too much, I did tell my supervisor that I needed some time to go through some dysphagia theory on my own, and they appreciated my honesty. So just be really open about it. Ask for support when you need it. Next, please. There is a CPD diary on the RCSLT website. I don't know if it's just my brain. I could never locate it when I tried again. So it's nice to have a screenshot of it. It's under menu, your career, newly qualified professionals, and CPD diary. Next, please. Top tips for final year students. Next, please. I think the biggest top tip I could give you is make a realistic checklist for each week when you're on NQP. By realistic, I mean it should be achievable. It shouldn't be 10 things that you need to check off your list in a week. It could be 3 or 2. I try to stick with 2. This is one of my checklists for November, and I still haven't ticked one off, as you can see, but that's okay. You just carry it forward to the next week. It's also really nice for you to bring this up with your supervisor during your supervision meeting. So talk about what you've achieved, and talk about what you'd like to achieve in the next few weeks. Yeah, next, please. Work-life balance is so important. I can't stress on it enough. I just want to tell the final year students that it does get better. I know when you're in uni, even when on the weekends, you'll have to think about deadlines, think about different lectures that you have to attend. But when you're working an 8 to 4, 9 to 5 job, you can switch off completely. So that's nice. You can switch off on the weekends, like Alice mentioned. Just don't do anything. Sometimes if you just want to have a free weekend where you're on the couch watching TV, do that. And it is hard to move on to working life because you have to stay switched on from 8 to 4, 9 to 5. So allow yourself time to get used to the working life routine. And again, ask for support. Don't hesitate. You're not expected to know it all. If you do know it all, it would be surprising because you're a newly qualified professional. So take your time. Yeah, sorry. The last slide is seek support. Don't hesitate, and take your time learning new things. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Thanks to the student panel. That was amazing. I'm just aware of the time, so I'm afraid we are going to have to stick to the time we have for the programme today because we have our panel of managers coming to speak to you next. So if you could have a few minutes break and come back at 11, that'll give you just enough time for a comfort break and grabbing something to drink, I hope. See you at 11 o'clock and we'll take some questions later. Thanks very much. Okay. So we're going to get started back. I hope most people are back in the virtual room. Apologies for the very short break, but I'm aware that we have colleagues who've joined us who are on quite a tight schedule today. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our managers who've joined the manager panel discussion. So we have Sarah Buckley, who's Company Director and Practice Manager at Sarah Buckley Therapies Limited. She's also Vice Chair of the Association of Speech Language Therapists in Independent Practice, ASLTIP, which is also a partner with RCSLT. We work very closely together. All members of ASLTIP are also required to be members of the RCSLT. We also have Irma Donaldson, who's Specialist Services Manager, Children and Young People's Mental Health Services and ASD Pathway Lead at Hertfordshire Community NHS Trust. Irma has just also joined us as Deputy Chair of the RCSLT Board of Trustees, which is wonderful. So welcome to Irma. We have Rosalind Kyle, who's the Assistant Manager and Speech Language Therapy Service Lead at Belfast Health and Social Care Trust. And Rosalind is also a trustee of the RCSLT Board of Trustees. And finally, Fiona Flett, who's the lead SLT for mental health and learning disabilities at NHS Grampian. So welcome everybody. So for this session, I'm going to be asking colleagues to help with, well, reflecting on some questions to support those of you who are joined us as students, to help you with thinking about preparing for an interview and also for looking at job applications. So in fact, the first question I have for the panel is, when you receive an application, what makes it stand out? So I'm going to start with Fiona, if I go to you first, Fiona.
Hello and good morning, everybody. I'm coming to you from a very snowy north of Scotland, so I hope you're warm wherever you are. For applications, I think the key thing that I can say is, and I cannot reiterate it enough, is to make it specific to the post that you're applying for. Very often we get applications that have been cut and pasted from other posts, and it's quite obvious that the person maybe hasn't looked into the actual role or the area where they're going to be working. So even though there might be elements of it that you're wanting to cut and paste, think about how you can make it specific to the role that you're actually applying for. And also, generic statements are okay. Buzzwords are okay, but try to put them in your own words and to try to tie them into the questions. I won't lie, the questions for NHS Scotland that you have to answer are a little vague. And there's 3 key questions, and the third question we often get no response. And that's a no-no. You need to put something in the box, even if you're like, this is a bit vague. So really think about what you're putting in. And if you're not sure, ask someone. And even phone up the person who's advertising the post and ask them if you're not clear about a question that's on the application. I really welcome phone calls from people and getting to know people. I have just appointed a band 5 in the last few weeks, and she made contact with me by email and then made a short Teams conversation long before she was brought to interview, and it made such a difference. So that is the other kind of key point. And I also want to say is that we're not expecting you to know everything. So really, you put in the range and the knowledge that you have, but we also want to know about you as a person when it's a band 5 application, and also your previous experience. 2 of the previous speakers came into it after having other careers as well, and we want to hear about that and the relevance to the post that you've applied for. So that's really important as well.
Thanks so much, Fiona. So Sarah, any other comments from you to build on what Fiona said?
So applications in the independent sector look a little bit different to NHS applications, is the first thing to say. Usually in the independent sector, application is CV and covering letter. And it's really important to identify why you're looking for independent sector working as opposed to public sector, and just some evidence that you've done a bit of research about what that looks like. And then to make an application really stand out, it's lovely if the applicant has had a look on the company website, investigated the work and the project that the company is involved in, and really shows some insight into why they want this particular job.
Thank you so much. Rosalind, over to you.
Hello everyone, I'm from Northern Ireland and we have a slightly different process for band 5s. We have, so I'm not sure if many are on the call from Ireland or anywhere else interested in Ireland. We run one band 5 interview for the region, so we can have hundreds of applications for the one interview. So really, in terms of the application, we want something, it sounds obvious, but that's complete. We'll not search for information. It needs to be very obvious that you meet the criteria. So just check it over right at the end. You would be surprised how many applications are rejected at that stage because people have just forgotten to fill in one box or have not filled in the criteria. The other thing is, for us, it's having a very concise and relevant application. We are not looking, and you could have spent hours. It is not an assignment. You need to just meet the criteria and you will be through for an interview. So the application form should be quite straightforward. So
Thanks, Rosalind. So over to you, Irma. Any thoughts from you?
Yes, I'd say be really clear on what the person spec's talking about and make sure that you are putting things down that match the person spec, because shortlisting sometimes can be quite brutal when you're actually saying, is it there, is it not there? So really think about the application, and also think about your experience outside of being a student and home life, and what transferable skills might be there that would be applicable to the job that you're thinking about as well.
Okay. So the next question is going on to the interviews themselves. So we want to know, and to support the students today, if interviews are all virtual or if they're in person now, or is there a mixture of those two approaches? But how should students prepare? So I'm going to ask you that question first, Sarah. Thank you.
So for my organisation, we offer a combination of either face-to-face or online interviews. We tend to start with an informal meeting, first of all, to discuss the post, and then progress to a more formal, semi-structured interview process. In terms of preparation, really do research the organisation. Some organisations cover breadth in terms of geography, so make sure that the logistics are going to work for you. Are you going to be able to navigate that post and go to where you need to be? Is it going to be feasible? Because if it's not, then it's a bit of a non-starter actually going through that process. Have a look at the organisation information and have a look for those core values, who they are as a team, projects that they're working on, so that you have some sense and understanding of the direction of travel for that organisation. And in terms of questions, ask questions about the induction process. How long is it? What's involved in it? What will your timetable look like during that induction process? Will you be at full capacity or reduced capacity in those initial couple of months? Do ask about supervision in terms of frequency, in terms of allocated supervisor, what that looks like. And think about any areas that you have a particular interest, or any areas that you think, actually, I am going to need additional support in the first year to develop my skills in this area. As a manager, that's absolutely not a problem for me. If you're telling me I'm interested in this area, as a student, I haven't had very much experience, that's absolutely fine. I need you to identify that so that we can work jointly on building that into your first year of working.
Thanks very much, Sarah. So I think you've answered some of the questions that were posed during the previous panel discussions. That's really helpful. Irma, do you want to come in next?
Yes, so in addition to what Sarah's already shared, having an understanding of the type of work that you're going to do. If it's not clear from the application, make the call. If you can do a visit, do a visit. So actually have a really an understanding of what it is that you're actually applying for, and whether or not it's something that you will feel passionate about or not. It really isn't great to be applying for a job that your heart's not in it and actually you're not going to enjoy. So really make sure before you actually go to the process of going through an interview, which could lead to a job offer, just make sure that that's the right type of post for you at that time. And talk to the contact person, research the trust or the organisation that you're going to be working for. Do their values, as they are displayed on their material, their website, and in conversation with people, do they align to your values? Are there things that concern you about anything in the organisation? And ask questions. Before interviews, an opportunity to ask whatever questions you like. We love to answer the questions because it means that you're interested.
Great, thank you so much, Rosalind.
Again, with our application process, you would have indicated already in what areas that you were most interested in and prioritised. So again, think about those when you're coming for interview, because it could be some time from application until the actual interview. But we will have your papers in front of you, so in front of us, so we will know. Our interviews have been a mixture. I think we're heading more towards more direct interviews. We tend to do them on a kind of a speed dating type of model where we're moving around quite quickly. So it's really important to have read the information that you've been given for the interview, that you know where you're going, and you know what style of interview, because even listening across this panel, every interview will be slightly different. So just so that you're really prepared and that nothing really throws you. I would say that it is really important to reflect on your experience as well, because you can always apply learning from one placement through to another. We expect students not to have covered every clinical area, and that's okay. And it's okay to be passionate about something that you haven't been fortunate enough to have as a direct placement. You can bring that in, so make sure that you bring that in. Our questions are not there to trick you. So generally students should be able to prepare some responses, so at least that it is to be expected. So prepare some answers, and that can just help when you're very nervous, that at least you will have maybe heard that kind of a question before. The other is that most of ours will have a contact person to speak to before your interview. It really does help, and I think some of the other panelists, but that really comes across clearly that you have spoken and that you have some idea. And just lastly, just really believe in yourself. This is your moment. These are your few minutes. Believe that you are the best person for that job, and it'll come across. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Fiona, finally to you on this question.
Yeah, I think everybody else has really said what I would say, but the final point is that we sometimes get band 5s to do a presentation. Now there's mixed feelings about that, but actually the reason for doing the presentation is as much about the information that you present as how you've prepared for that. And also the research that you've done, how you've presented it, whether it's on PowerPoint or by notes or whatever you actually do. So think about it as a whole process. It's not just what you say, it's how you present, and it's all the other things as well, as much as what you actually, the information that you're delivering that we're looking at that point as a band 5. We're really looking at you as a whole person.
Thank you. So that moves me very swiftly or very well to the next question, which is when interviewing, what core skills and soft skills are you actually looking for? So Irma, what are the key things you look for?
So a band 5 speech and language therapist, we'd love to be able to see that you're a communicator, that you've got the evidence that you can adapt your communication style to different situations, that you've got a flexibility of approach and thinking, you've got a logical approach to problem solving. But to be honest, bottom line is we want to get to know who you are as much as we can in an interview process. So be authentic and be honest. You know, as Rosalind's already said, we're not expecting you to have had all the experience that you across all clinical areas. We're not expecting you to absolutely know everything. There's a recognition that we've come through quite interesting years in the last few years. So people's experience in terms of student life has been different. Placements have been different. So there is an understanding that that's where you're coming from. So be honest, be authentic about what you've experienced. But we'd like to see, you know, how do you approach new situations? How do you approach challenges? So yes, the content of the technical knowledge and know-how of speech and language therapy that you've been exposed to is important, but actually there's still so much to learn when you come out as a student. And actually that's one of the beauties of our profession, isn't it? You're constantly learning all the time because things are new and developing. So we're wanting to know, who are you as a person? How adaptable and flexible are you? How can you communicate your thoughts? And how do you approach new challenges so that we can see, okay, if you come into our organisation, you've actually got the baseline of what's needed and what can we add, what value can we add to you in your career journey?
Thank you so much. Rosalind.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with Irma. This is about sharing who you are and what your passions are and what your interests are. We are obviously interested in how you're coping with that stressful situation of an interview. And we will try to make you as comfortable as possible. So it isn't a negative to be nervous. We expect people to be nervous. And that's the panel's job, to try to relax you into the interview and to get the best from the interview, your best self. Yeah, so we're probably looking for you to be enthusiastic about learning. Yes, it is describing your knowledge and your experience, but we need somebody who's prepared to learn, and as Irma said, to be flexible and is interested in that. And the other one is a desire to work in the area that you have indicated that you're interested, or the place that you are. That needs to come across, and that, you know, so that we can really, that will stand out amongst, as we said, we are doing the one big interview for the year for the whole province. So we need, that will stand out. Okay, so thank you.
Thanks so much. Fiona, any additional thoughts from you?
I think something as well, one of the students said, is that don't try and lie, admit if you don't know, and don't try and bluff it, because we'll know. And we'd rather you were really honest. And I think that is really important. Say, I don't know, or can I hear the question again, or can I get some pointers as to what you're looking for? You know, ask us if you're not sure. But yeah, I think that's my key bit, is don't bluff it, tell us the truth.
That's great, thanks. Sarah?
Yeah, to reiterate what my colleagues have said, if you don't know an answer, that's okay. But think about some strategies around, if you don't know something in terms of a clinical area, indicate where you would go to find that information, or just indicate that's where you would need support. What I really like to hear in terms of soft skills from an applicant is that they're willing and able to reach out for support as and when they need it. You don't need to be in a silo in the first kind of year of working. You need to reach out to your colleagues, reach out to your manager, and evidence of that in an interview, I think, shows me that someone is very open and someone is quite non-defensive, and they know their own scope of practice. So I think that's really important. We're not expecting you to know everything, but it's helpful to know that you know what you do know and where you need to ask for help. And think about some strategies. Interviews can be overwhelming situations. So think about what you might say or what you might do. If you do go blank, ask for the question again, or ask if you can have a moment to think about it. Absolutely reasonable, because we want you to do well. We want you to shine and to have a positive experience. So just plan ahead some strategies that you might use if you get overwhelmed.
That's really helpful. So the next question for the panel, I think, will answer some of the questions that have been coming in earlier this morning. So it's really about what questions can or should candidates ask at the interview. So I'm going to go to Rosalind first on that one. Thank you.
The obvious questions that come through, the most common questions come through about the support, supervision, or the induction. Those are good questions, because coming from answering the questions, trying to be confident about all that you do know, it just switches it to admit a little bit of humility and realizing we're just entering into the world of work, and there are some things that we do not know and that we need support for. So if you do not know that already, the other thing is just very basic, practical. Where is the post and what would the travel expectations? Because this is also about you deciding, are you a good fit for us? Are you wanting to come? So just to know, and that has been referenced earlier by Sarah, just that you know where you're coming to and what the job is. Thirdly, I thought, is something of the job plan. We talk about the amount of clinical, non-clinical, the amount of CPD, or the expectations. You could ask around that. And if you really are interviewing us, you could ask a little bit more. You could probably see the information on the website. You will have spoken to people, but you may have queries about us as an organisation. So it could be something around our achievements and, you know, our priorities in our service, or it could be also a question about what the challenges are currently, so that you are more informed by the end of the interview on what you would wish to have for your future career.
Thanks so much, Rosalind. So Sarah.
Yeah, just to build on Rosalia's point about logistics, my organisation is based in London, so I welcome any questions around who are the population, what's the demographic that we're going to be working with. That's quite important. Our inner London families that we support are very different to our outer London fringe families that we support. So what's the range in terms of population? For me as an organisation in the independent sector, it's helpful to start asking some questions about how this role may differ to a role in the public sector. And are there different growth and development opportunities? How does this post look different to a public sector post? And what are my expectations in terms of career development and growth? Because that does look a little bit different in the independent sector. And I think it's okay to ask your manager some questions around their own journey. So often applicants will ask me why I went into private practice, what that looked like, what were the drivers. And I think that shows a genuine interest in not just the organisation, but the people within the organisation. It's that good opportunity to information share who you are as an applicant, but also to find out who the managers are as people.
Thank you. Irma, any additional thoughts?
Yeah, so in addition to what Sarah was saying about finding out about the people who are interviewing you, you can ask them, what do they enjoy about their work? What do they enjoy about working for the organisation? You know, what is it that gives them a buzz coming into work every day, to see if that aligns with you or not. I think it's really helpful to have an understanding going in terms of continued professional development and what that might look like in the organisation and how you'll be supported to be developing your skills, because we've acknowledged you're coming in from a baseline place, if you like, and there will need to be continued growing and learning. And what does that look like in the organisation that you're interviewing for? But also thinking about if you've got any particular needs that need to be considered for the role. It might be worth mentioning that if there's something that's very pertinent to you as a person or to your family in the way that you're going to be approaching work, then it would be helpful to bring it in terms of what accommodations can be made, what support needs, if there are any. I'm talking very broadly because that could cover absolutely anything in terms of your own unique situation, but it's an opportunity to have a bit of a conversation, because again, that enables the people who are interviewing you to think about what would it look like bringing this person into role, and the support needs that they might have. And I suppose anything that you are aware of that makes you anxious about the role would be helpful to know about, actually. We're not expecting perfection. What we want to understand is insight and an understanding that you coming into the role, your unique package of who you are coming into the role, might need to have a unique package of support. And what do we need to know in order to do that best for you?
Thanks, Emma, because in fact some of the questions that have come in is about when do you disclose the fact, for example, that you might be autistic to your employer and are neurodiverse speech therapist while supported. So people have asked, is that pre-interview, interview or onboarding? So you've talked about how you should, you can talk about these things at the interview itself. So are there any other reflections on at what point do you disclose that from what you said, building what you said, Irma? I know Fiona's going to speak as well, but I don't know if you have any.
I think it's all part of this is who I am, and this is who I am coming into this role. And the interview process is to actually say, look at you interviewing the organisation. Do you want to actually work there? Do you want to be with these people? Do you want to entrust your the first step of your career into this space? But it's also about the organisation really having a good understanding and a clear understanding of what your needs might be. Because actually we will need to look at what do we need to be putting in place to ensure that you can flourish in our organisation. Because that's what we want, ultimately. We want people who are coming in who are passionate about what they are being interviewed for, but we also want you to be happy, and we want you to flourish, and we want you to be able to build your career, because it is an amazing career, a profession, and we want you to experience that with us.
Brilliant, thanks so much, Irma. So Fiona, any other thoughts from you on this question?
I think on the specific question, most of it's been answered, but on the point of about when to disclose any specific needs you have, it would be from that point of interview, but also you don't need to interview, but also when occupational health comes in, that's often when we may find out, but it's often really helpful at an early stage because you will not be discriminated against if that is in your application. So if you wish to put it in your application, you will not be discriminated against. There's very, very tight legislation and laws around that, so that will not happen. But what interests in you is about you as the whole person and all the bits of you that brings you to that role, and it is really important, and that knowledge and experience is what we're really wanting to hear about and find out about. So that, I think, yeah, I don't think really I have anything else to add to that.
Thank you so much. So we talked about the differences in maybe looking at coming for interview. Anybody got any top tips around if it's a virtual interview? So I'm going to go to Irma first.
Yes. I know that everyone comes into an interview process nervous, and you might think, okay, a virtual interview might be a bit easier because they can't see all of me and I can do whatever I need to. One of the things that I would say is don't make copious notes, don't make lots and lots of notes and have them all around you, because what can happen, and I have seen happen, is that interviewees get so tied to the notes, to the things that they've written down, that actually the true you doesn't come through, or you get lost in trying to find what you've written down and where. So in terms of preparing, there's a certain amount of preparation you can do based on understanding what the job is, and understanding where you're going to be working and some of the technical things about the role, but actually it's about who you are. So don't get so bogged down in writing it all down so that you can read it out and be perfect. That really is going to skew the dynamic in the interview, and it will be quite stilted. I would say dress as if you're going to be to an in-person interview. It helps in terms of your own self-confidence, but it's about how you present yourself in a professional manner as well, because you're presenting yourself as a speech and language therapist. Really, you're saying, I'm a speech and language therapist, I want to work in your organization. You might be your first role, but you're still saying, I'm a speech and language therapist. So be mindful of that for whatever that looks like for you in terms of presenting for interview. A very important point is think about what your setup is for the virtual interview. Can we see your face? Is the lighting right? Have you got a window behind you so you're just a silhouette? So something really practical in terms of having a look at, what do I look like? Do I need to have an extra light on my I have an extra light on my face right now, just because I know it makes things brighter, and it makes it more pleasant for people to look at. Have a glass of water handy. Everyone gets a dry throat, even the interviewers. And it's absolutely fine to have something and to have a sip, and just allow yourself, if possible, to enjoy the process. I know that sounds weird because you think, an interview, it's just really nerve-wracking, but actually if you can enable yourself to relax into the process, into the answering of the questions, into just being your authentic self, being honest and reflecting who you are, hopefully you will come out of that interview process realizing it was a bit of an obstacle, it was a bit tough, but actually that was okay. So it's not necessarily going to be smooth sailing, because there will be nerves, and it is an interview process, but allow yourself to recognize that fits happen for different reasons in different organizations. And if you are right for this organization in this role, you will be offered the role. If you're not, it doesn't mean that you are not good or that you are a failure or that this isn't for you. It just means that there's another fit for you somewhere else. So just have the confidence that who you are as a person has taken you to the stage that you are in terms of your learning career, and it will carry you through as well. So a virtual, yes, I'll stop. I wasn't being concise.
Yeah, that's okay. We've got one more question, but I just want to go around the rest of the panel on the virtual interview prep. But thank you so much, Emma. So Rosalind, to you next. Any other top tips around preparing for it?
I think most of the people probably on this are as expert virtually now as we are as a panel. So but it's just very practical tips. For us, we use an outside organisation to do that, and they expect people to go on to practice their connection, just to make sure their picture, their vision and their sound, because that's the most difficult. We will ask you to repeat if we cannot hear, but it is distracting, and it's equally distracting to you if you don't hear us fully. So just do ask for a repetition. So practice that virtual connection before the interview. It's one less thing to worry about how to connect. It's just so that you do that the day before. Just again, another very practical is, think of your background and what is around. It's again, no interruptions or distractions. But if interruptions happen, connections, and just talk that through that situation if it does happen. And lastly, you have always an opportunity to come back to ask for feedback, and you may get feedback around your virtual presence that may be useful if you need to go for another interview. So please do come back for feedback.
So Sarah and then Fiona, just a few other reflections from you, because I want to move to the last question too. Thank you.
Yeah, so I think my colleagues have covered the technical aspect in terms of just making sure you're familiar with the specific platform that's being used. It might be Zoom, it might not be. So make sure that you're familiar with the platform, and absolutely everything that everyone has said in terms of don't wait until the day and time of the interview to check your tech. Make sure you're checking it ahead of times. I have had applicants who are from regions where Wi-Fi is a bit shaky. That's okay, but let me know in advance. So let me know that potentially that's going to be an issue. Don't leave any of that to the last minute. And if you are an individual who finds virtual more challenging than face-to-face, and if you do need any reasonable adjustments for that interview process, again, let me know ahead of time. And there are things that we can do to smooth that process.
Fiona.
I think the only thing to add is that if something does go wrong, exactly what my colleagues have said, but actually how you manage what has gone wrong will tell us quite a lot about you as a person. So do consider that if things do go wrong.
The last question, and I'm going to start with you, Fiona, is that we are obviously very keen to encourage our students to get involved in RCSLT professional networks, including hubs and particularly clinical excellence networks. So we just wondered if you could share how you think these networks have helped students in the past. That would be really great. So Fiona, do you want to start with that question?
Yeah, I think there's a huge number of signs, and I think it's a really good way if you've got a specific interest, particularly if you're not getting on placement, that if you can hook up to some of these signs and be able to attend and join. You might not realise you can join as a student, but quite a number of them if you can, and they're fantastic CPD opportunities. But for you starting out in your career, it's also a fantastic way of getting to know people. And that is so yes, some of them may be online, but a number of them are in person right now. And if you can show evidence that you have been to those events, and also, so it's not just about SENS, it's also about, Communicating Matters. Their conference was recently. They have away days. There's a huge range. I could list endless ones, but there's lots of ones that have specific student rates that you can attend. It looks fantastic on your CV and application if we can see that you've done that. It really shows interest. It shows interest out with the learning within your university as well. And it also increases your knowledge and skills that you can demonstrate to us during the interview process. But more importantly, when you actually start work, you come in with a much broader experience. So I think it is important to look for those opportunities out with the university experience that are out there, and Twitter is a great way of finding out about things, but also joining some of these organisations is another way about finding out about things.
That's great, thank you. Sarah?
Yeah, just to add in terms of SENS, that often students don't realise how cost effective SENS are in terms of getting CPD opportunities. So they are much more manageable in terms of budget, and hugely valuable in terms of networking, particularly if you're not sure which sector you're thinking of working in. So it's a nice opportunity to meet with colleagues in the private, public and charitable sector to give you that breadth of understanding around the different ways that speech and language therapy works in the UK. We also, as an organisation, RCSLT have an annual conference, and we do have students that attend that conference. We do a reduced rate for non-members. So do have a look on the RCSLT network. Again, that's a good way of finding out more about the private sector if that's something that you're interested in.
Thanks so much, Sarah. And so, Rosalind, do you want to go next?
All I would add is that Royal College have hubs, and we do have student members who can attend those hubs, again, for very similar reasons. It's about developing relationships, your network, so that you can develop your clinical passion. That's what it's about. But we would find that those students that have joined us, certainly their confidence, yeah, you can just see it grows so much through just helping to organise events. It's volunteering for things as well as learning. You can learn while you're volunteering for our conferences and our study days and our events. We have students who go to the political conferences, you know, to advocate on behalf of speech and language therapy. We have students who join us on lots of campaigning around, and we can always do with some more volunteers, and students in the past and at present in Northern Ireland have been really, yeah, they've been just great. So yeah, so it's mutually beneficial. We love the students to join us, and we think you gain something from it. So thank you.
Great, thank you. So Irma, finally to you. Oh, you're on mute, sorry. It's okay, you get used to it, don't you?
Totally. It's bound to happen once today. I think that everyone's given a lot of good advice in terms of SENS and hubs and getting involved in the Royal College of Speech and Language Therapy activity as a whole. Social media. Everyone is social media savvy these days, students particularly. So even if you aren't necessarily able to attend in person and there's an area of interest, find out if there is a SEN, get hooked into their social media, because it enables you to think about what's happening in that area of work or that with that particular client group, and exposes you to some of the key themes or most up-to-date thinking or questions that are happening around, and that just broadens your thinking really to apply to the basic knowledge and understanding that you're picking up as a student, but actually giving you some value added of what's current, who's saying what do I think about that, and helping in terms of your reflective skills. You don't actually have to agree with everything that you are exposed to, but it actually helps in terms of developing that reflective skill of what do I know? What don't I know? Where do I need to find out about it? Who do I need to talk about it? Does that fit with what I'm working with, or doesn't it? What's the evidence? All of those questioning that we do, or the question that we do as clinicians, and as you will do coming into your new role, will be enriched by being exposed to a broad range of information. And RCSLT has got a lot of information on its website. The hubs are amazing in terms of thinking about your geographical network, and the clinical excellent network, so brilliant for tuning into specific areas of interest in terms of the work that we cover, because it's an amazing profession and we cover so much.
Brilliant. So we've had lots of questions posed all the way through the morning, some of which I think are useful for the managers to think about. So one of them is about Band 5 jobs. Are there any Band 5 jobs that are part-time or have flexible working arrangements for full-time roles? I don't know who can answer that one. You're all nodding. Who'd like to come in first? Just Fiona. Rosalind, yeah.
We're being too polite here. Yes, absolutely. Well, there can sometimes be an assumption that the majority of Band 5s are really needing to work full-time, but we do have always funding for part-time posts as well. So absolutely, if that is something that you're interested in, do ask, because sometimes we can, yeah, that can be offered. Absolutely. In terms of compressed hours as well, there's always the opportunity for that as well. So yeah, there's certain flexi. Absolutely, you say what you can offer, we can say what we have to offer. So yeah, okay. Absolutely.
Brilliant. So other questions are about the timing of applying for jobs. Is it okay to start applying before you've finished your course? And obviously that links to HCPC registration, which, by the way, you do have to do yourself. That is not automatic, but the HCPC will expect you to have evidence that you've passed your course. And I'll come back to colleagues about timing, but I don't know if anyone's got a view on the timing for looking for jobs in terms of the course completion. Fiona, and Fiona, do you want to go in first? Yep.
You can apply. Ooh, drop my mouse. You can apply anytime, and we welcome applications a few months even before you graduate, because I think one of the students went in and started as a band 4. So there is opportunities that if your registration isn't through, that or if there are other, or if there's a delay in you getting your qualification, whatever it may be, we can appoint you. Not every area can, but we can appoint you as an assistant first and then move you into that role. But it's you can certainly apply for posts. I've had people apply 6 months before they've graduated, and we've interviewed them because they meet the person spec and they meet what we actually want, and we'll be prepared to wait for people. And I think it also comes in about, you don't need to start your post immediately. That's the conversation that you can have with your employer as well. But your start date is dependent on when it works for you and works for the service. So I think that's the other element to that question.
Thank you. Irma, did you have any additional comments on that? Or?
Yeah, I was going to, Fiona's actually covered a lot of what I was going to say, so I can pass.
That's fine. We'll go on to the next few. There's quite a lot of questions, so I'm going to go and pick another one. So somebody's asked, what are the expectations during the first few weeks as an NQP? So I think you've covered off some of the issues around the students the newly qualified practitioner panel talked about the fact that they had quite structured days, but sometimes that didn't quite work out. Emma, did you want to come in on that?
Yes, I can. So there will be an induction period. And when you're starting, there's an understanding that this is all new and that actually you're going to be bombarded with lots of information that's new every day. And you're going to go home brain dead, probably, from meeting all the different people that you're meeting and the different experiences that you're having. So the expectations in the first little while coming in is actually that you get an understanding of where you're going to be working, who your key contacts are going to be, the work that you're going to be covering with them, and having an understanding of what's involved in the work that you're going to be doing. So there is opportunity for shadowing, there is opportunity for structure, but there should be some flexibility, and actually that's something that can be negotiated. So if you're in a situation where actually you're needing some time to consolidate, or you would prefer to do things in a different way, talk about it, communicate about it, because it's actually got to work for you as well as the organisation. You will be set, and there will be will have been thought before you've started about what you're going to be doing and where you're going to be, and there will be conversations all along on a weekly basis, sometimes moving forward and then extending in terms of the work that you're going to be doing and questions that you may have. So there will be hopefully an opportunity for you to clearly articulate if something isn't working so well for you and why, so that actually then it can be problem solved. So it's not anything to be frightened of, and I would hate to think that you'll be going into a situation where you are given no guidance at all. That's not what we would want. We want you to come in, we want you to flourish, we want you to feel settled and safe, and if there, whatever it is that you need in order for that to happen, that's what we need to be working on together.
Thank you. And that sort of links to another question, which is about the expectation for progression through the NQP framework. What would somebody like to say about that? Because that's one of the questions that's been posed about how quickly that might happen, or what the expectation is to support people to progress through the RCSLT NQP framework. Sarah, did you want to come in on that? Yeah.
Yeah, sure. So in our organisation, our initial induction takes 3 months. And then at that 3-month meeting, we take an initial glance at the NQP framework and get an overarching sense of what have we looked at so far and what are the areas that we want to start working towards. That framework then fits in terms of supervision, in terms of bringing that framework to supervision and creating opportunities or reflecting on opportunities. And most full-time Band 5s complete that framework by the end of their first year. If they're part-time Band 5, it can take a little bit longer. There's flexibility within that, and there's flexibility to create opportunities if that isn't part of the working role.
Okay, thank you. And we've got another set of questions which are about the sorry, I'm trying to find it now, about the support around dysphagia competencies and whether there's any support that's given. I think, does that vary? What do people want to say about that? I don't know if anyone here can help with answering that question. I know it came up in the earlier panel session. Rosalind and Fiona, yeah.
Yeah, from our perspective, that will be part of supervision and support. Absolutely, you will both have a mentor and a supervisor, but you will have a key person that is guiding you through the dysphagia competencies, because from a management point of view, it's giving you the opportunity to address that. So that will be job planned in, and there will be support. Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you. Fiona.
Yeah, and just to add to that, it is dependent on the person as well about how quickly that happens, and it depends on the experience, and every person I've found is different on how long they need, how much sharing opportunities they need, the support they need. But again, I think it goes back to, we want you to flourish, we don't want you to fail, so we want to give you the support that you need to feel confident and manage to be able to go out and do it. And even if you've been doing it for far too many years like I have, we still need people to go to and go, what about this? And I think that's the thing to remember. Even really experienced therapists need somebody to go to and go, I've not seen this before. What do I need to do? So remember that.
Thank you. And there's also a few questions, people concerned about the degree they might get, and if their degree classification isn't good, will that limit them? And also somebody else asking about, will it be limiting for them if they can't drive? So two things which are about, do certain things limit you when you're applying for jobs? I don't know who wants to come in on that. Irma, did you want to come in?
It should be clear on the job application. I am unmuted, so you can hear me.
Yes, yeah,
okay,
yeah.
Sorry, I just had a moment then. So on the job application, it should be really clear if a car driver is needed for the role. So that's something that you should know up front. There are some posts and some areas where actually being a car driver wouldn't be, not being a car driver won't hold you back. But because it just all depends on what the role is, where the role is, and what the travel requirements are for the role. So that's something that would be, if it's not clear to you at the point of application, at the point of interview, that's something that you would need to really truly understand to know if that's a role for you or not. In terms of your degree classification, different people have different support needs. So I wouldn't, if you've passed, you've passed, and your starting point doesn't determine your end point. So it's all about understanding, how is it that you've got the classification that you've got? What learning do you need to think about in terms of your student life and approach to the course? If you've passed and you can apply, because actually, as I say, nobody 10 years down the line is going to say, what type of degree did you get? What was your classification? As with anything, once you've got the degree, that gives you an entry point to apply for posts. Doing an application gives you the opening door to be shortlisted. Shortlisting gives you the opening to be interviewed. Interviewing gives you the opportunity to be appointed, and then your career progresses. So it's a stepping stone. That's what I would say. What learning do you need to reflect on? How did you approach it? What are some of the things that you need to be considering? What do you need to address, if anything? And if you're not happy with the classification that you've received, if you're happy with it, then it's not an issue. But that sounds like that's someone who's feeling a bit nervous about what they're going to come out with at the end. So pass, and that opens you up. If you don't pass, go again, and do whatever it is that you can. If you are really passionate about it, don't let a classification stop you from progressing something that is going to be really meaningful for you and that you have energy for, because actually it's a moment in time, of a period in time.
Thank you. I think that's really important, because there are a few questions around that. So clearly some anxiety from some students. Before we finish for a break, Rosalind, there's a question for you. When during the year do interviews for Northern Ireland typically get posted?
They can get posted around about May time, but there will be, the information comes through to the universities as well, so people will be very aware of that. Sometimes through COVID we've had differences, so it can come through a later one if we've run out of the waiting list, so one can come through maybe around about December, January, but generally they're coming out for around about May, so that we're just getting you at the end of your career.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Okay, so we're now going to have another refreshment break. Sorry, it's very short, 10 minutes from 11:50 to 12. We said, I think we're 2 minutes over. Just want to say a big thank you to the manager panels. And I'm very aware Emma has to leave, but the others will stay. So we'll have another session of question and answer later. So thank you so much to all of you, and we'll see you in a few minutes. Take care. Speak soon. Hi, so we're going to get started back. We've had a few requests to make sure that we do take the questions that have come in through the Q&A as the most significant questions that people are worried about in terms of issues. Before we start the workshop, I think actually it'd be quite useful to ask the managers about this question, because I think it'll go into your workshop as well, is really about how do you get over the feeling of imposter syndrome and feeling like I'm not ready, because I think it might link to some concerns students might have. I don't know, Sarah, do you want to come in on that question from just before we go into the workshop?
Yeah, sure. So I think this speaks to the organisation's culture and values. And I think very quickly what you'll find in your first post is that we're speech and language therapists. We like to talk. And I don't think it matters how much experience you've got, what band you are. I think there's a very collegiate atmosphere in most organisations. And people are very non-defensive about asking for help. And a band 7 might ask a band 5 for help, and a band 5 might ask a band 7 for help. And it goes both ways. So I think, yes, absolutely, I'm aware imposter syndrome is a huge doubt and anxiety. But the culture of the organisation usually is such that there's open sharing of information, that there's lots of opportunities to get support from your peers and from your managers, and there are opportunities for learning all the time.
Thank you. So we'll have more time for questions, and I think at the workshop as well, if any of the issues that link to that come up, please do talk about them. So moving on to the next session, it's a workshop, so it'll be an opportunity for you to have a discussion. So this is going to focus on equality, diversity and inclusion, and being your authentic self in the workplace. As you know, we do not control the NHS or other employer organisations. They're run through the mainstream of government, and obviously each organisation is slightly different, but what we are trying to do is to work at a system leadership level to influence into the system, so that employers who employ our members support them to feel safe, to feel respected and to be themselves. As Sarah was saying, it's really important that you then look at the values of the organisation for the jobs that you apply for, and also service users. So it's not just our staff and our members. So remember, it's your responsibility as a newly qualified practitioner, just as much as anyone else is in your service, to create a healthy and positive culture in the workplace. It's really important that you and no one around you should have to hide your true self, and whether that's any of the protected characteristics, so your sexuality, your race, your religion, your access needs, and some of the questions that have come up already have been about issues around neurodiversity. But if an issue arises at work, it's really important that you do speak up. and do so in any constructive and professional way that you think is appropriate. And if you're not sure how to do this, then do reach out to a peer or a mentor to help you. I have had to do that myself as a fairly newly qualified practitioner. I had a situation where I was being treated in an openly racist way, and it was a very tricky thing, but I did raise my concerns to the senior manager at the time, and she dealt with them professionally, and I thought was very well handled. It's really important as well to remember that having a deeper understanding of equality, diversity and inclusion will affect how you work with your patient populations. As we've said all the way through this morning so far, remember that you're interviewing your prospective employer as much as they are interviewing you. So good leaders won't dismiss your needs, and nor should they refuse you an opportunity because of your differences. So it's really critical that you look at that. So consider, and I think the managers have already said this, about what adjustments you may need in the workplace. And some of that, as well as being about any disability you might have, which might be hidden, it may well also be about, as I said earlier, about your religious needs. For example, spaces where you can pray, the use of pronouns and what you would prefer. So creating open and healthy conversations with your line manager are critical. But if you don't need any adjustments, try to think about this from another person's point of view. And there's a social image which we're going to be sharing with the group when you go into your workshops, which we hope will help you. So the next 25 minutes or so is designed to help you start thinking about how each person has a unique set of circumstances and experiences, and how accepting and accommodating these creates a safe and positive space. So each group will have a facilitator, and they're going to take some brief notes, and you've been allocated 7 minutes per task. So those will be presented to you and include the following. So what are the barriers that may prevent someone from being their authentic self, and what can be done to address them? Are there risks about being your authentic self at work, and what can be done to mitigate or lessen them? And what benefits are there to being your authentic self at work? So we hope that you enjoy the next session. And in the meantime, I'm going to be checking on all the questions that have come in and look at the ones that we really need to focus on when we get to the end of towards the end of the morning. Okay, back to all of you. Thanks very much. Okay. Do you think we're ready to go back? Yeah.
Yeah, I think we'll be fine now.
Okay, thank you everyone, and I really do hope that you found that workshop session useful. We're going to make PDFs of the Jamboards, and they'll be available on our website after the event's taken place, so you can see what you and others have contributed, and we hope that that will really be helpful for you as you keep going forward in your journey. So as Jasmine said, that we now have time to have more question and answers. So I'm going to go back to the Q&As, the questions, sorry, that you've posted through Slido. So I have been making sure that I'm learning how to use this technology as best as I can. So we've talked about imposter syndrome, and I just think because there are so many people who've indicated that they want to talk about it, I know that we've asked managers what their views are. Just to say that we all have this, I'm sure, in our lives, and I still have feelings of imposter syndrome, even though I'm now coming towards the end of my career and in my current job. And there are lots of things that might trigger that feeling. So I don't want, I want just to share, and for managers maybe on this call, just to share how they've handled these feelings of imposter syndrome. So I don't know if the managers who are still here can share some of their experiences and how they've dealt with them. So I'm looking for them on the screen. So I know Sarah, Rosalind and Fiona are still here. So would one of you, who'd like to go first on that? Have you ever had imposter syndrome, and how have you dealt with it? Sarah, did you want to come in, because you're nodding?
Yeah. So yeah, just to echo Kamini's point, I still experience imposter syndrome as part of my role. I think for me over the years, what I've learned to do is to really acknowledge it. So if I am experiencing it, check myself rather than letting it spiral into anxiety, to actually check myself and say, actually, if I don't know how to do this particular procedure or process or meeting, let's do some preparation. Let's make sure I'm feeling ready for it. Let's do some positive self-talk, because actually I do know what I'm doing in most of these situations. And I think in the workplace, we have a very non-defensive culture. So imposter syndrome is something that we talk about as a group. And I think raise it with your peers, raise it with your colleagues. And I think you'll be surprised that actually what they will say to you is, I feel the same way. I actually feel that I'm the only one in the room that doesn't know what they're talking about. And I think that leads to a very nice open dialogue around, we're all bringing something to the table. We can learn from each other. We're not expected to know everything. There are going to be situations where you don't know 100% what you're doing, but that's okay. It's all right to acknowledge those feelings.
Thank you so much. So if you feel that we need to explore that a bit more, can you just put something in the question in the Slido box? Tom, there's one here for you that I'd like you to help us with. So Tom, do you want to introduce yourself? So a question about what competencies and sign-offs are required to complete the NQP year. I'm sure that's a question you get a lot, aren't you, from newly qualified practitioners?
Yes, indeed, it is. Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Tom. I'm the Professional Inquiries Manager at the Royal College of Speech and Language Therapists, which for you guys basically means if you contact the RCSLT, you get stuck with me there to help you and try and support you. So NQP competencies are a massive area that I get asked a lot about, and it's something that we're here to support you with. The NQP competencies sound like a scary thing, but they really are not. They're there to support you and to help bridge the gap between being a student where you've got your tutors behind you, you've got your supervisor behind you there, you're holding your hand and helping you do things, to when you're an NQP and you're making decisions yourself. And I think they're there to help put some structure into that sort of that transition between student and NQP. They're designed to be done alongside your work, your day-to-day work. You may find some employers will expect you to do dysphagic competencies alongside those as well, but they can be interchangeable. So some of the things you do with dysphagic competencies can be used in the NQP competency framework and vice versa. So it's about sort of sitting down, having a look at them. What we suggest is you sit down, have a look at them with your supervisor in your first week or so, and just make a plan of what you're going to do. And if you've got any questions, my number and my email address are on the website everywhere. I'm there to chat through them with you, and I'm there to support you in any stage. So give us a call. We're there to help and chat through them with you.
Thank you. And I always get great feedback about how wonderful Tom is in supporting members, and he'll do his utmost. So thank you, Tom. Before you go,
I was going to say that's my imposter syndrome there. I don't believe that. So.
Oh, you are. So before you get off this spotlight that we have you in, HCPC registration. This is something that Tom and I talk about regularly. Mm-hmm. We know there are problems, have been real delays around registration, and I'd already informed the students that obviously they need to apply for their registration, and they have changed the process. So it's really, really important that you make sure that you provide all the accurate details that HCPC now need, because they no longer write to you. They've changed the process. But also, in terms, do you want to give a quick update on what people need to do and how long it might take?
Yeah, so the HCPC have changed their processes for the better, I must add. A lot of their processes were very paper-based previously, and they've gone online with their the application process, which is great. It's a step forwards, and it's the way we should, everything should be going. But it does mean that you need to make sure you've got all the requirements, all the paperwork to hand when you're filling in those forms. The HCPC on the HCPC website, they have a checklist that you can go through what you'll need to fill out that application form. So do have a look at that. As Kamini said, it can take a little while to get registered, especially in peak times when we have a lot of students coming through and they have to process a lot of applications. So the earlier you can apply, the better. Obviously, it really depends on what your plans are straight after university, whether you're going traveling or whether you're looking to go straight into work. But if you have any concerns or any questions, again, give us a shout. We can usually help you out, and we can talk through what's going to be the best route for you. Really.
Thank you so much. So I'm going back to the other questions that have had a significant number of people wanting them answered. So this one's about what you might look for. So when you're interviewing, do you favour candidates who have had relevant experience to that client group or clinical area? Going back to how tricky it's been in the last few years, some of us haven't been exposed to certain things on placement. I don't know who wants to come in on that question. So I'll read it again. Do you favour candidates who have relevant experience to that client group or clinical area? Rosalind, did you want to come in? Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I think I'd mentioned this earlier. We don't expect, we know as managers what placements and what opportunities there have been. We've been working very hard to give students a good range, but we know it has been limited in the last few years. So there isn't that expectation. So certainly as coming in as a band 5, there is not that expectation that they'll have covered every clinical area. During that initial year or during that band 5 post is the opportunity to develop your interests and your clinical expertise. So no, there's not. It's applying learning that you have across into other clinical areas. Certainly in our interviews, there wouldn't be a specific question around one particular clinical area. It will be around assessment or management across, and you can pick in a range where you're most comfortable in answering. So,
thank you. And linked to that, do all posts allow you to shadow first until you feel comfortable? Yeah, Sarah and yes,
yeah,
Sarah,
so I'll jump in and say absolutely. And that's for a couple of different reasons. It is around building confidence and giving you some clinical experiences that maybe you haven't had the opportunity for as a student. It's also to learn the organisation's processes and how things are done. So there's a learning objective and a clinical objective. But absolutely, shadowing and observation should be key. And that's a really nice opportunity to see how other speech and language therapists interact with service users and with the other team members that we work with, and kind of learn those professional skills. And I think that's an ongoing dialogue. So even post-induction, if you feel there are still opportunities that you would like to create for further shadowing and further observation, I would encourage you to have that conversation with your manager.
Thank you. So in the chat box, Tom has put in a link to the HCPC application guidance, and Kathleen has also put in information about supervision, which is useful for those first few months. So hopefully if you also look at those, that's really helpful. Thank you so much, Sarah. So people have said they'd like to see the interview questions that Gauri mentioned. Gauri, you're happy to share those? I think you said in the chat box you were, so we'll make sure we get those from you.
Yeah, very happy to share those, yeah. That's
lovely. Thank you so much. So I think it was Keris who mentioned occupational health requirements. I don't know if that's something that everybody requires, but Keris, did you want to just talk about that for a minute?
Yeah, I know with streamlining the process I went through with NHS Wales, we needed to fill out an occupational health questionnaire just to make sure that we've had all our vaccinations, any allergies and things like that. I think it depends really with who you're applying with, but NHS Wales, we had an occupational health questionnaire to fill in.
Okay, I don't know, Caroline Walters is on the call because we've managed to persuade the Welsh Government to stop using streamlining. So I don't know if that means that they're doing this anymore. Caroline, did you want to come in and just introduce yourself? That'd be helpful, thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Caroline. I'm the External Affairs Manager for Wales for the RCSLT. So lovely to see you, Keris. I saw your tweets this morning about joining today. That's a really interesting point about the assessment, and it's definitely something we can check. As Caroline mentioned, we've had lots of concerns about the streamlining process, and I'm sure, Keris, I know it was something that was, a real worry to students over the last few years. And we're actually going to be doing a survey with students now ahead of the changes to the NHS bursary arrangements. So I'll be definitely catching up with you on that, but we can definitely check in on that occupational health point. I'm not clear if it's still part of the new arrangements, so I'll check.
So it doesn't seem, I don't think what we're saying is not a requirement UK-wide. It seems to have been something that's specific.
Okay, we'll definitely check.
Unless anyone else has got a different view who's on the call.
I know we had to get verification of our vaccinations to get occupational health cleared in Nottinghamshire. The thing I found was if I emailed the occupational health department at the trust that had overseen our uni OC health jab, so in our case it was the Leicestershire Glenfield people, they just emailed me back with the records and I forwarded that on, and that was enough to get it cleared.
Okay, so it's something to ask about because it seems like it's variable. All right. Another question is again about if there's a particular trust that you'd like to work in, but there are no jobs advertised, would it be appropriate to get in touch with them to introduce yourself? So would that be okay? Well, are managers happy for those sorts of calls to come in? Who wants to answer that? 2 people raise their hands. Fiona, did you want to come in?
Hello, yeah, absolutely. Contact the organisation and ask, because it shows keenness, it shows interest, and also there may be posts coming up that they're going to be able to tell you about, but also there might be temporary opportunities, there might be other opportunities we can offer. We're currently offering internships to students so that they can come and work with us during their student holidays, etc. if they want to come and work with us, with the hope that they will then go into employment within our area. So I would certainly advocate making contact with the area if there is a specific area and type of client group that you're wishing to work with.
Thank you. Rosalind, did you want to come in?
Yeah, also just to say that there could be other posts around that are temporary that may be useful, you know, in children's or adult services. There are other support roles that even to come in for a few weeks would give you a great advantage in knowing the organisation and being ready for to apply for a post specifically. So I would say yes, absolutely, to contact. We always have banks of, we're always trying to recruit from agencies as well. So while you're waiting for a permanent post to come up, that's another way to become known and to gain experience of the organisation and the specialism you're interested in.
Thank you. So a couple of questions that have come in about to be an SLT in Wales, do you have to speak Welsh? So specifically obviously for the organisation that Cerys works for, but Caroline and then Cerys, do you want to come in?
Yeah, with my organisation, Betty Cadwaladr, people can apply, and we offer, like, there's Welsh courses, people could learn Welsh as well. It just depends really. We have some people in my organisation, they've learnt Welsh with us, which is really great. But I think it depends if you're in the west or if you're in the centre of North Wales or in the east.
Yeah.
But maybe Caroline might be able to tell you a bit more.
Like Cara says, really, it would depend on the job role. There are some job roles which are Welsh essential, but there are also job roles that they will specify the amount of Welsh that is required for the role. I guess in a lot of roles in Wales you will see desirable, but that's not to say that, as absolutely as Cerys said, it all really depends on the job role. But obviously Cerys works in North West Wales, don't you, Cerys? And
yes,
there's a very, very high percentage of Welsh speakers in the area, so you will probably see more Welsh essential roles in that area. You probably would see less roles like that in other areas.
Okay, thank you. So I think, was it Cerys, did you mention TRAC, T-R-A-C? Was that from your presentation?
Yes, it was. Yeah,
so I
applied through TRAC, as in streamlining, and then TRAC was where I would be able to check the status of my job application, and where I had the information of my conditional letter, my unconditional letter, where I need to do my occupational health and any other checks on that one. It was on TRAC, was the website.
Okay, so specific to that area. Okay, thank you. So I mean, you can do stay on this call, this bit of the call, because the other question I think is relevant to all the NQP panel members. So the question is, do you have enough time in your working day? Do you take work home or with you, or stay late? So anyone wants to come in? Cerys, do you want to come in first?
Yeah, I find it really important to try and switch off once your hours are done, kind of thing. Switch off and don't take work home, because otherwise it'll look like if you're working at home after hours, it'll look like you're able to cope, or maybe you haven't got enough work to do, or you've got too much to do. So it's really important just to finish when you're supposed to finish. It can be hard but it is really important to not overwork yourself, because you need to have a work-life balance, definitely.
Any other comments?
Yeah, I think I just agree with that. And that in your supervisions, well, in my supervision, certainly my managers have been kind of highlighting that to me and advising me to talk to maybe the other band 5 in the team to get suggestions as to how she best organized her day, and yeah, using the calendar to actually block out time, so that because we share our calendars with the team, if other people are saying, if I'm late in and they're looking to allocate, they're saying they can see that I've got some time booked out for non-clinical stuff, and wherever possible they'll try and allow me to do that. So yeah, I think it's difficult, and if you are struggling to fit things into your working day, that's something you should not try and just manage through in your evenings and weekends. Talk to your managers about it, because if you're working day and night, you're not going to be productive.
No. Okay, Faye. And I've got another question about.
Sorry, I'm out.
Oh no. Oh.
Sorry. I mean, I don't find it too bad, but obviously I came from teaching where you work all the hours that God sends, really. Because I'm community and I do get so much autonomy over how I structure my day, I do tend to work later into the evening, but I have a bit of downtime when my kids come home from school. So it balances out, and basically everybody's fine with that. If I had, like when I had that very complicated safeguarding situation, I was working quite late into the night, and I got told very firmly to make sure I took the time back later in the week. So as long as you're sensible, I don't find that it's undue. We get regularly told to make sure that we keep our caseloads to a manageable level, and don't feel like we have to sort of jump to get everybody off the waiting list immediately. So it's not bad, really. It's been very supportive and very positive.
Thank you. Gary, did you want to come in? Sorry, I think you did earlier.
No, I think everyone's covered every point. It's just I just wanted to emphasize on the fact that try not to get burnt out. So again, like Faye mentioned, if you're working extra hours, try to get that time back. And it just means that you might have to have a chat with your line manager about it, but it's really important to switch off after work hours.
Thank you. So some of the question is about, do days normally start at 8 and end at about 4, or does it depend on the organisation? So anyone want to take that question?
I've heard that it's quite, certainly my course mates who've also gone into hospital working, I think it's often quite common just because of when the board rounds happen and when's best to see your patients. But equally, the team here are quite flexible. So there are some people who come in a bit earlier or come in a bit later, or work part-time but longer days. So I think that's, for hospitals at least, I think that could be kind of core hours, but there's often flexibility.
Sarah, did you want to come in?
Yeah, just to say that my organisation, we are a school-based service. So in terms of working hours, it's pretty much when school hours are in. Having said that, on an admin day, we're completely flexible. So people can choose to start late, finish late, come in early, finish early. I think there's, where possible, most organisations will offer flexibility, with the limitation that in a hospital or in a school, there are certain hours that you're expected to be patient-facing.
Thank you. So I think it does vary and depend. So I think it's really important to find out and have a look at. And we did answer a question earlier about flexibility. So I'm going to the next one, which is, I think, more for the managers. How much would you value experiences over, say, how people come across an interview? I know you've mentioned, those of you who were on the panel earlier, what you might put in an application form around previous experience, but what do you think about that question? How would you value experiences over, say, how much people come over in an interview? So who wants to go first from the manager panel? Fiona.
I think it's both, because I think for that first job, it's all about you as a person and what you bring and the knowledge you've taken from those experiences. And the best will in the world, because of COVID and because of other reasons, people have not had the breadth of experience and on the job experience than previous years might have had. And it's also about what placements you can get access to during your time there. So I think it is a bit of, I would say it's a bit of both, but it's also about your experience again out with work. You know, is there other things that you're doing, other things that you're involved with? Are you going to the sessions? Have you been to open days? There's lots of different factors that we take into account rather than saying it's one thing over another. It's about that whole person and all the different bits that they bring, would be my perspective on it.
Thank you. So there's quite a few more questions. I'm going to keep going down them. So there's a question about coming from being an international student and if that will actually affect your job application process, or anybody wants to come in about international students?
I might have something to say about that, because when I being an international student myself this year actually, I found it difficult to know what the visa processes were, because I hadn't met anybody who was international and then went on to get a job in the UK. If it makes it easier, I'm happy to respond to your emails, but basically you'd have to apply for a skilled worker visa, and that's often sponsored by the organization or the company that you're working for. For my job, my organization sponsored my visa, so I had to apply for the visa by myself, but it was sponsored by the organization. So now I'm on a skilled worker visa.
Thank you. We're working on an international recruitment project as well. So Guri, could we put you in touch with one of our members of staff?
Yeah, I'd love to come. Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Lovely. Thank you. Sarah, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I think Guru is absolutely right in terms of know your visa requirements. And you need to know, does the organisation, first of all, have a sponsorship licence, and do they have available certificates sitting on that licence? So it's not just enough that they can sponsor, they have to have available certificates.
Thank you. So the next question is, if you're wanting a soon-to-be NQP, will you specify this in the job description, or can we apply to any band 5 positions without having registration? Does that make sense? So if you're, do you actually specify in a job description that this is a role for an NQP, or can NQPs apply to any band 5 positions when they've not actually got their registration? Rosalind.
In our organisation, you can apply to any band 5 position. We don't specify NQP only posts.
Okay,
that's ours.
Thank you. Fiona's nodding. It's the same for you and Sarah too. Okay, so that's answered that one. So a question about encouraging your fellow students to take part in EDI. I don't know if that came up in the workshop session that you've just been in. Has anyone got any reflections on that? It could be somebody who's in the workshop session. Anyone got any ideas about how to encourage fellow students to take part in EDI? We're doing a piece of work with our universities and encouraging them to be engaged in this process. So we've got a group that we've set up of universities who have got people who attend a working group, and we are working with them to support them to look at this whole issue. We've also put some information on the website for students. We have an anti-racism reference group, and that meets on a monthly basis at the moment, and we've also got a lot of resources on our website. So we've got a professional network site that we've set up, and we're going to be encouraging our members to put information in there. We are going to be working on ideas like what you might do if you've got 5 minutes, 10 minutes or 15 minutes to help people on this journey. So just to say that, do look out for information on our website too. But if any of you have been involved in your own universities, do let us know. So, and Sarah's put something in the post, which is really helpful. So lots on, certainly on our website on this area. And we are also working to support our members to look at health inequalities as the broader EDI agenda. And we've developed a an audit tool for people to use for services, but also for universities to audit how they teach in their curriculum and to think about how they approach that teaching process. And we've shared that with the Council of Deans for Health. So that's hopefully being disseminated out to all course providers, so for people who are training all allied health professionals and nursing too. So it's great that we're at the front, well, we're leading in some of that development, which is really positive, and we're very proud of that. So you do look out for all these things. So so I think we've talked about, sorry, these keep jumping as people are adding to what they want to have answered. So the next question is about what is the starting salary, and would you be happy negotiating higher salaries, particularly because of cost of living crisis? So I don't know who wants to answer that question. Obviously we have a agenda for change bands, don't we? Fiona, did you want to go first?
In Scotland, the pay is set by NHS Scotland, and the trusts, the individual boards, there's 14 in Scotland, don't have any say in changing that, and we're not allowed to. And actually, if we pay any of those any enhancements, we can get heavily fined. So wherever you go in Scotland, the bandings, you can go and you can Google it. You'll be able to see really clearly what the starting salary as a band 5 is. Currently, there is pay negotiations ongoing about that, and they're different and separate from England and Wales and Northern Ireland. But again, that is also available online. But I know the picture will be different in the other 3 nations.
Thank you. Sarah?
In the private sector, it's really variable. Some salaries will be higher than NHS banding, some will be lower depending on the terms and conditions. In the independent sector, there's always room for negotiation and always room to, if not start on a higher salary, to agree a date at which you'll review the salary. So that process is definitely in place. It's also worth thinking about whether the organisation offers things like relocation grants or introductory bonuses for joining a role. I know that's becoming increasingly common. So it's not just about the core salary, it's also about that introductory financial offer.
Thank you. So going back to the application process, a question about, do employers provide feedback to applicants if they are unsuccessful at getting the role? Yep, Sarah, you do. And so does Fiona. Did you want to come in? Yeah.
Yes. You need to ask for it, and ask for it in a very reasonable time scale with, you know, there's a very definite, and ours is around 6 weeks, because after that all records will be archived. So to ask for feedback would be absolutely appropriate.
Okay, thank you. So I think people have been putting information in the chat box. So if you haven't seen it, there's some useful links that have gone in there about tax relief. So you can claim tax relief for HCPC registration and for professional subscription fees. So it really will help you when you're looking to come out from the into the world of work. And also we have a hardship fund, so if people are really struggling, and thank you to Neve because she's asked us to really promote that and to support members to raise further funding for it if needed. So thanks very much, Neve, for raising that as an idea. So in fact, Neve, you've asked a question to Alice, which is, I found your career journey really interesting. Was there an experience or event that made you want to transition from previous roles to being a speech and language therapist?
Yeah, I answered this question in my interview. So yeah, I started very much with a languages focus. So that's why I went into the translation industry. And I was actually working in medical and pharmaceutical translations. So I wasn't translating myself, I was working in the project and operations management. And I really enjoyed that, but there was quite a few changes in the industry, and it became a lot more based on pricing rather than quality. And when you're translating about how to take a medication, that's quite crucial. So I kind of became a bit disillusioned with what was going on in the industry, and had wondered about teaching actually when I first graduated as well. So went and taught, and I loved that. I loved so many things about it. I loved having the direct effect on people who I was working with, you know, seeing the improvements, but I knew I didn't want to do purely teaching for long term. And then actually I saw on social media someone who I used to study with during my undergrad degree was actually doing SLT, and saw what she was doing and thought, actually this ticks a lot of the boxes that I want to do, of what I want to do moving forward. So kind of then did some research and applied from there.
Thank you. So, and thank you, Rosalind. I've just seen you need to leave. We've got 1 more minute for one question, and then any others that we haven't been able to answer, we'll respond to later. So if I'm successful for a job application, do I need to start straight away, or can I take a break before starting? I think you may have partly covered this before, but I don't know who wants to answer that question. Sarah.
It's completely up to you and the organisation to negotiate that. I've had individuals who've been successful and then started 6 months later. I've had individuals who've started within a couple of weeks on successful reference checks. So I think that's part of that interview and application dialogue to look at when you're looking for someone to start. Ideally, I'm looking to start, and to have that conversation with the employer.
Thank you. And another question about flexibility. Is there flexibility across adult and paediatric routes? Is it simple to change, or would you have to stick with the client route you started your NQP year in? Who wants to take that as the final question? So that flexibility of movement. Faye?
I know it's one of the reasons that they introduced the rotation around the adult areas here, was that you can feel very much like you're almost on an episode of Dragon's Den in your final year, when you're sitting in lectures and all these guest speakers are coming in to try and convince you that their bit of SLT is the best, go towards theirs. And it means that I think the experience was that people were getting pigeonholed fairly early on in their career and ending up very much down a fixed trajectory of, you do your stroke, you do your learning disabilities or whatever. So that's why they introduced the rotation, so that we aren't forced to specialise too early on. Although, being honest, learning disabilities is my particular thing that I want to come back to.
No, fair enough. Sarah, very quickly from you, and then we'll move on. Thank you.
Yeah, so interestingly, in the independent sector, increasingly people are employed part-time by 2 different organisations, one peds, one adults, in the first couple of years. So they have the opportunity to experience both and potentially stay on both routes. So that's pretty new, but that is emerging increasingly.
Thanks so much. So I just want to say a really big thank you to our panel members, the panel members on the NQP panel and the manager panel. I'm just going to share a few more slides. So one is just to remind you to take a few minutes to complete the evaluation form. So you can just scan the QR code or click the link, which is going to be posted in the chat. And just to let you know now a bit about a piece of work that we've just launched, which is called our Horizons project, and it's to help us to build a profile of our membership. So people have talked about, you know, working in different areas, and we're really keen as well to understand where members are, but also to understand and take forward our ambitions for an equal and diverse profession, an inclusive profession. So it'll help us with informing and strengthening our policy and influencing work, because when we're asked by governments how many speech therapists work with children, because they don't have the information, you know, it's really important that we have that knowledge. And it's also really critical that we have an understanding of the pattern of jobs and where they are, so we can see that the differences across the UK. We're wanting to also use it so that we can share information with you in the right sort of way, so that you're not overwhelmed with information, because we know there is so much that's there. And of course the profession now works in so many, I think we've got 35 different clinical areas in which we work. That is a lot. You won't have been exposed to them all as students, we know that. So here's a list of the objectives, but we just really want to ensure that you put your profile in. It's you know, joining the RCSLT when you leave your position as students into NQP, the NQP world, we hope we can provide you with lots of support in your career journey. We've mentioned some of the ways that we might do that, and it's really important that as part of the profession and that networking opportunity that you've had today and you'll continue to have, that we really support your development going forward. So we do that through lots of ways, whether it's through the clinical excellence networks or through the conferences we have, but also through lots of other mechanisms that already exist. So just a plea to please get involved, and everybody is a leader. So just remember, again, going back to the conversations we've had earlier, that it's amazing what you can do and you are already doing. So just to say, here's a snapshot of our website page, the member dashboard, and you can see what it looks like. So the profile is on your right hand screen of the right hand screen, so you can have an opportunity to go in there and put in your contact details, and it helps you to update your information quite easily. So we look forward to you filling that in. I think, do we have a little competition for that as well, Cara? I can't remember.
Yes, I was just putting the link in the chat as you were speaking. Yeah, so if you do this before the close of play on Friday, you'll be entered into a prize draw for potential to win £50 of shopping vouchers. So definitely worth doing this week.
Okay, thank you so much. So we're now going to have an option for you to stay and do some networking. We're really pleased that we have members who've been on the panel who are going to stay around as well for you to have a conversation with, and also some of the staff at the RCSLT who've joined us. So you'll have seen that they've been popping in. For example, the RCSLT Research and Outcomes team, I noticed that there were some questions that we didn't get to about going into that area of work. So do ask them those questions. And there's general opportunities for networking too. So you are able to choose which room you'd like to enter and move around if you want to. So obviously do feel free to grab some lunch and come back at any point. But I just want to say a really big thank you for joining us today. Please do, as I said, fill in the evaluation form, because we'd really like to hear about your thoughts so that it'll help us to plan for the student day next year. Thank you to all of you. It's been absolutely amazing meeting you all. And I look forward to hearing more about how the rest of the day goes. Thanks so much. Take care. All the best. And thanks again to the planning group before I forget. Okay.